War I broke out because a driver took the wrong street. On the 28th of June 1914, a 19-year-old assassin had already failed in Sarajevo. He had missed his target with the bomb. His target had escaped. The plot had failed, so he walked away to buy something to eat. Then, a driver, unaware that the route had changed, turned down the wrong street, stopped the car, and began backing up straight toward him. Seconds later, a gun went off. Empires collapsed, borders disappeared, millions of people died, and the most unsettling thing is that history is full of moments like this. Today we take a look at 20 criminals who had no intention of changing history. They simply committed a crime, and the world was never the same again. Number 1. Sarajevo, June 1914. We file the First World War under archdukes and alliances, and blame a machine so vast that no single hand could have started it. Except the hand is right there in the record, and it belonged to Gavrilo Princip. He was one of a loose cell of young Bosnian Serbs who wanted Austria-Hungary gone from the Balkans, and their morning had been a disaster. A comrade's bomb bounced off Franz Ferdinand's car and wounded bystanders. The Archduke drove on, alive and furious, and the assassins scattered in despair. Princip drifted toward Schiller's delicatessen to eat. What no plotter arranged was the Archduke's decision to visit the wounded in hospital, or a chauffeur who was never told the plan had changed, or the wrong turn onto Franz Josef Street that left the car stalled and reversing 5 feet from a boy who could not believe his luck. He stepped forward and fired twice, killing Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. At his trial that autumn, he insisted he was a patriot, not a murderer of women, and because he was underage, he escaped the noose, only to die of tuberculosis in a cell in 1918. By then, the ultimatum, the mobilizations, and the treaties pulling one another down like dominoes had killed some 17 million people and swept away 4 empires. Every trench of it hinged on a driver who missed a turn. Number 2. The men who killed Rome to save it. Step onto the Senate floor on the Ides of March, 44 BC, and you would swear you were watching a rescue. Roughly 60 senators, daggers folded into their togas, believed they were surgeons cutting a tumor out of Rome. Marcus Junius Brutus most of all. He was said to descend from the man who had thrown out Rome's last king, and he was certain that killing Julius Caesar would hand the Republic back to the Senate where it belonged. 23 wounds later, Caesar lay dead at the foot of Pompey's statue, and the assassins ran into the streets with bloody blades, expecting to be carried on shoulders as liberators. Rome answered with a riot. Mark Antony turned Caesar's funeral into a weapon. The crowd hunted the conspirators through the city, and what Brutus had actually removed was the one figure strong enough to hold the factions apart. Into that vacuum poured 13 more years of civil war, and out the far end walked Caesar's teenage heir, Octavian, as Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Republic did not fall to the tyrant Brutus feared. It fell to the men who murdered to prevent one. Dante would later place Brutus in the very mouth of hell, chewed for eternity beside Judas, which feels harsh for a man whose only real crime was being catastrophically wrong about what he was doing. Number 3. Who made the Mona Lisa famous? You have stood in that scrum yourself, phone raised, craning over strangers for a glimpse of a smallish painting behind bulletproof glass. Now the part the audio guide skips. In 1900, the Mona Lisa was a quietly admired Leonardo, not a planetary celebrity. What made her famous was a burglary. On the morning of the 21st of August 1911, an Italian handyman named Vincenzo Peruggia, who had actually helped build her protective case and knew the Louvre from the inside, put on a white worker's smock, lifted the painting off its 4 iron hooks, slipped the panel under his coat, and walked out into Paris. Nobody noticed for over a day. When they did, the empty stretch of wall itself became a pilgrimage. Crowds lined up to stare at the 4 bare hooks and the gap where she had hung. Her face ran on front pages across the world, on postcards, on newsreels. The police even dragged in a young Pablo Picasso for questioning before letting him go. For 2 years, Peruggia kept her in a trunk in his cheap apartment, and when he finally tried to sell her to a Florence dealer in December 1913, he was arrested and she came home a superstar. He claimed he had only wanted to return her to Italy, and Italians half treated him as a patriot. Either way, he had proven a strange law of value. Sometimes the fastest way to make an object priceless is to steal it. Number 4. The pistol that rewrote the rules. 2 pistols, hidden under a cloak, are such ordinary things now that it takes effort to remember there was a first time a single person could carry, in one hand, the power to erase a nation's leader. Balthazar Gerard grasped it early. In 1584, the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule had one indispensable man, William the Silent, Prince of Orange. King Philip II of Spain wanted him dead so badly that he put a bounty of 25,000 crowns on William's head and, in a public decree, branded him the enemy of the human race. Gerard, a devout young Catholic hungry for that reward, spent months talking his way into William's household in Delft, gaining trust, waiting. On July 10th, he caught the prince on a staircase, drew a wheel-lock pistol, and fired twice into his chest at point-blank range. William became the first head of state in history assassinated with a handgun. Gerard's punishment was among the most savage on record, 4 days of tortures before death. But the thing he introduced outlived him, concealable, patient, and terrifyingly democratic, a weapon that let one nobody kill the most powerful man in a country. Keep him in the back of your mind. A surprising number of the people still to come in this video are, in a very real sense, his heirs. Number 5. A consul's job in Paris. Charles Guiteau wanted a job. Specifically, he wanted to be made American consul in Paris, a post for which he had no qualification beyond a rambling campaign speech he was convinced had personally won the 1880 election. When the Garfield administration kept refusing him, his grievance curdled into something worse, and he decided God wanted the president dead so that his own faction of the party would take power and finally reward loyal men like himself. On the 2nd of July, 1881, he shot President Garfield in a Washington railway station and, by his own account, cheerfully announced that the vice president would now take over. Garfield did not die of the bullet so much as of his doctors, who probed the wound for weeks with unwashed fingers until infection killed him that September. Here is the reversal Guiteau never imagined. He had killed to protect the spoils system, the machine that handed out government jobs to political friends exactly like him. Instead, his crime so revolted the country that Congress passed the Pendleton Civil Service Act, signed in January 1883 and preserved to this day in the National Archives, which ended the spoils system and built federal hiring on merit exams. Even the new president, a former machine man himself, was so shaken he became its champion. The one man who murdered for patronage is the reason patronage died. His bullet wrote the qualifying exam you would sit for a federal job tomorrow. Number 6. Canterbury, 1170. December 1170, and 4 knights of King Henry II of England decided to do their furious lord a favor. Henry had spent years locked in a bitter fight with his former best friend, Thomas Becket, now Archbishop of Canterbury, over a single question: did the king or the church hold power over the clergy? After yet another royal tirade against his troublesome archbishop, 4 knights, Reginald Fitzurse and 3 others, took the outburst as an order, rode to Canterbury, and cornered Becket inside his own cathedral during Vespers. A monk named Edward Grimm stood close enough to have his own arm nearly severed as he tried to shield him. His eyewitness account survives. When Becket refused to yield, a sword stroke sheared off the crown of his skull. The knights expected a grateful king. What they produced was the fastest saint of the Middle Ages. Within days, townspeople were soaking cloths in Becket's blood, and monks were bottling it as a miracle cure in little lead flasks. He was canonized in barely 3 years. Canterbury swelled into the greatest pilgrimage site in Europe, the road Chaucer's travelers would ride in the Canterbury Tales. And Henry, rather than winning his war with the church, was stripped and flogged by monks at the tomb in penance and quietly dropped the whole campaign. 4 men set out to remove 1 priest. They forged a weapon the church would point at English kings for the next 300 years, closer to 3.5 if we are being strict, until another Henry, VIII, finally smashed the shrine in rage. Number 7. The bomb that made a holiday. Nobody ever identified the hand that threw it, and yet that one object, a homemade bomb tossed in the dark, is the reason a great share of the planet takes the 1st of May off work. Chicago, 1886. A national campaign for the 8-hour workday had brought hundreds of thousands into the streets, and on the evening of May 4th, a crowd gathered in Haymarket Square to protest police who had killed strikers the day before at the McCormick plant. The rally was so calm that the mayor stopped by, watched, and went home. Then a column of police marched in to break it up, and out of the dark someone lobbed a dynamite bomb into their ranks. In the gunfire that followed, 7 officers and an unknown number of civilians died. In the panic, 8 anarchists were tried on almost no evidence linking any of them to the bomb, and 4 were hanged in 1887. One of them, August Spies, promised from the gallows that a day would come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you strangle today. He was right. In 1889, the Second International, meeting in Paris, named the 1st of May International Workers' Day in memory of the Haymarket dead. An anonymous fuse in an American square became a holiday marched under in 100 countries. In almost all of them except, pointedly, the United States, which shifted its own Labor Day to September to keep well clear of the radicals it had made into martyrs. That is 7. And everyone turned on a single person who thought they were doing something small. Quick favor before the next stretch. Drop a comment telling me which of these 7 you had never once connected to its aftermath, whether it was the wrong turn, the burglary, or the disappointed office seeker. I genuinely want to know which chain of cause and effect you never saw coming. Number 8. Killed on his best day. What do you give the man who freed 23 million serfs? In Russia, the answer turned out to be a bomb. Alexander II had earned the title Tsar Liberator by ending serfdom in 1861. And on the morning of the 13th of March, 1881, he did something no Russian ruler had dared. He signed off on a plan to bring elected representatives into his government, the first hairline crack toward a constitution. Hours later, riding along a canal in St. Petersburg, he was ambushed by the revolutionary group People's Will. The first bomb missed his armored carriage and tore into his Cossack escort. Then came the human mistake that killed him. He stepped down from the wreckage to help the wounded. A second bomber, Ignacy Hrinievsky, dropped a device at his feet that shattered his legs, and he bled to death within the hour. The radicals were sure his death would ignite their revolution. It did the reverse, and then it kept going. His son, Alexander III, buried the reforms, throttled dissent, and unleashed the anti-Jewish May laws, and a wave of pogroms so brutal that millions fled west, reshaping the century wherever they landed. The road People's Will thought led to freedom instead led, 36 years later, to a revolution and a civil war more merciless than anything they had pictured. They killed a man on the one day he was trying to hand them what they wanted. Number 9. Why you empty your pockets to fly. A briefcase, a note slipped to a flight attendant, and a claim of a bomb inside. On the 24th of November 1971, a calm man in a business suit and dark glasses, who had bought his ticket as Dan Cooper and ordered a bourbon after takeoff, hijacked a Boeing 727 out of Portland. In Seattle, he traded the passengers for $200,000 and 4 parachutes. Then he had the plane flown low and slow toward Mexico, lowered the rear air stairs in flight, and stepped off into a freezing night over the forests of the Pacific Northwest. He was never seen again. The FBI worked the case for 45 years and closed it with no name, no body, and one of the few genuine unsolved mysteries in American aviation. Now, you might reasonably assume that a single unsolved skyjacking changed nothing at all. Then look at your last boarding pass. Cooper's leap, and the wave of copycats it inspired within a year, forced the changes that ended what people later called the golden age of hijacking. Boeing 727s were fitted with a spring-loaded wedge, nicknamed the Cooper vane, so the rear stairs could never again be dropped in flight. And by January 1973, for the first time in history, every single passenger in America was made to walk through a metal detector. One polite man with a fake bomb built the security line you shuffled through this year. Number 10. A knife to stop the killing. Charlotte Corday paid 40 sous for a 5-inch kitchen knife on the morning of the 13th of July, 1793. She was 24, from Normandy, and she had watched the French Revolution rot into the terror, denunciations and executions feeding one another until no one felt safe. She blamed one man above the rest, Jean-Paul Marat, the journalist whose newspaper openly called for more heads to roll. Corday talked her way into his rooms with a promise to name traitors, and found him not at a desk but soaking in a copper bath, treating a raw skin disease. She stabbed him once, cleanly, through the chest. 4 days later, she went to the guillotine, composed to the end, telling the tribunal she had killed one man to save 100,000, and the killing she meant to end, it detonated. The revolutionaries embalmed Marat as a martyr. The painter Jacques-Louis David laid him out on canvas like a slain saint, an image the whole grieving nation absorbed. And his murder became the pretext for a new and far bloodier phase of the terror, the one that fed thousands more to the blade and carried Robespierre to the top of it. Corday had reached for a knife to shorten the list of the dead. She lengthened it beyond anything she could have signed her name to. Number 11. The ladder under the window. A homemade ladder, propped against a second-floor nursery window in rural New Jersey on the night of the 1st of March 1932. Up it went a stranger. Down it came with the 20-month-old son of Charles Lindbergh, the most famous man alive. The child was later found dead, and the case became the crime of the century, with ransom notes, marked bills, and a German-born carpenter named Bruno Hauptmann, convicted in part because a wood scientist matched a rail of the ladder to a floorboard sawn from Hauptmann's own attic. Yet the deepest mark this crime left is not the trial. For years, kidnappers had exploited one simple gap in the law: cross a state line, and no single police force could follow you across it. The national fury over the Lindbergh baby slammed that gap shut. Within 4 months, Congress passed the Federal Kidnapping Act of June 1932, nicknamed the Lindbergh Law, and soon handed the young Bureau of Investigation the power to chase a kidnapper across every state border in the country. The reach of the modern FBI into all 50 states began, in no small part, right here. A private crime against a single family had quietly rewired who is allowed to police an entire country, and it all traced back to a homemade ladder propped one cold March night against the window of a sleeping child. 10 down, 10 still to come. And notice what you have not heard once. A single army, a single battle, a single declared war. Every wound so far was opened by a person you could have shared a train compartment with. The back half is where the pattern gets harder to shake off, because some of these people set out to erase a name or defend a throne and achieved the exact opposite, and one of them handed a political party the keys to an entire country using nothing more than a box of matches. If the way these stories quietly connect is your kind of thing, this whole channel is built out of them. Subscribe, and the next investigation reaches you the moment it holds up. We don't post every day. We post when the documents actually survive a second look. Number 12. Ephesus, 356 BC. Say his name aloud in ancient Ephesus, and under a law written in 356 BC, you could be put to death for it. That was the entire point of the law. A man in that Greek city burned down the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and confessed on the rack to a single motive: he wanted to be remembered forever. Horrified, the Ephesians executed him, and then did something cleverer than mere execution. They passed a decree making it a capital crime to speak or write his name, sentencing him to be deliberately, legally forgotten. It very nearly worked. But a traveling historian named Theopompus, who owed no loyalty to an Ephesian statute, wrote the name down anyway, and the Roman writer Valerius Maximus later repeated it as a lesson in the hunger for fame. And so it survives to this day. Herostratus. His whole crime was a wager that destruction buys immortality, and the city's ingenious punishment, a law of enforced silence, is the one reason the wager ever paid. 24 centuries later, he is an entry in the dictionary, Herostratic fame, for doing exactly what he did. The law built to erase his name is the reason you have just heard it. Number 13. You have the right to remain silent. You can recite the words even if you have never once been arrested. You have the right to remain silent. They exist because of a violent crime and a drifter named Ernesto Miranda. In March 1963, Phoenix police arrested him and, after 2 hours of questioning with no lawyer present and no warning of any kind, secured his signed confession to kidnapping and rape. He was convicted. His appeal climbed all the way to the Supreme Court, and in June 1966, the Warren Court ruled 5-4 that the confession could not stand, because police had never told him he could stay silent or ask for a lawyer. The crime and the victim's suffering were entirely real. Miranda was simply retried without the confession and convicted again. But the case rewired American policing overnight, and carried by decades of film and television, taught the rest of the planet a script it now knows by heart. Officers were required to recite a warning before questioning anyone in custody, a warning still named after him, to the point that to Mirandize became a verb. A single coerced confession by a guilty man became a shield now raised over every person the police detain, guilty or innocent alike. He wrote, "Without the faintest intention of it, one of the great protections of the innocent." Number 14. One soldier, one company, one empire. Barrackpore, on the outskirts of Calcutta, late March 1857. For a full century, most of India had been ruled not by a country but by a company, the British East India Company, a private corporation with its own vast army of Indian soldiers, or sepoys. Then a rumor tore through the ranks. The new Enfield rifle cartridges, which had to be bitten open before loading, were said to be greased with cow and pig fat, an unbearable defilement for Hindu and Muslim soldiers alike. The company swore it wasn't true, and there is no clear proof it ever was, but by then belief had outrun fact. On March 29th, a sepoy named Mangal Pandey walked onto the parade ground, called on his comrades to rise, and fired at his British officers. He was hanged on the 8th of April. The execution was meant to end the matter. Instead, within weeks, the mutiny leapt from Barrackpore to Meerut and across the north, and rebels marched on Delhi to crown the last Mughal emperor as their figurehead. When Britain finally crushed the rebellion, the shock ran so deep that Parliament abolished the company outright and placed India under the direct rule of the Crown. One soldier's shot on a parade ground dissolved the largest corporation the world had ever seen and, in its place, raised the British Raj. Number 15. The murder that ran ahead of schedule. Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the richest men in Russia, invited a Siberian peasant to a late supper in December 1916, meaning to save the monarchy by killing him. The peasant was Grigory Rasputin, the faith healer whose apparent power over the hemophiliac heir had made him the Tsarina's confidant and, in the eyes of the aristocracy, a national humiliation with the war going disastrously. The murder reads like a horror tale its own conspirators may have improved in the retelling. Cakes and wine said to be laced with cyanide that seemed to do nothing, then shots, then a battered body pushed under the ice of a frozen river. What is not in dispute is the arithmetic that followed. Yusupov and his fellow nobles were convinced that removing Rasputin would rescue the throne and restore the Tsar's good name. 64 days after they killed him, the monarchy fell. Far from saving the Romanovs, the murder announced to everyone watching that the ruling class itself had lost its nerve and turned upon its own court. Nicholas exiled the plotters, which, by black comedy, put several of them safely out of reach when the revolution came for everyone else. They set out to protect a 300-year dynasty. With poison and pistols in a palace cellar, they helped run down its final clock. Number 16. 36 barrels under Parliament. 36 barrels of gunpowder, stacked in a cellar directly beneath the House of Lords, waiting for one man with a slow match. In 1605, a small band of English Catholics, ground down under a Protestant crown, plotted to blow King James I, his lords, and his entire government into the sky at the state opening of Parliament, then seize the country in the chaos. The man left below to light the fuse was Guy Fawkes. An anonymous letter warned one lord to stay away. The cellar was searched in the small hours of November 5th, and Fawkes was caught crouching among the barrels, arrested, and tortured until he signed a confession whose handwriting visibly collapses down the page as the pain took hold. Now the accidental part. The plotters dreamed of relief for England's Catholics. What they delivered was the reverse. Their failure hardened anti-Catholic law for generations and stitched suspicion of Catholics deep into English life. And every single year since, the country has lit bonfires and burned Guy Fawkes in effigy, children still begging a penny for the guy. A plot to erase a government was turned into a national festival celebrating that the government survived. They meant to end a regime. They accidentally gave it a birthday. Number 17. Florence. Easter 1478. Easter Sunday 1478. Beneath Brunelleschi's great dome in Florence, at the most sacred hush of the Mass. The Pazzi family, bankers and bitter rivals of the ruling Medici, quietly backed by Pope Sixtus IV himself, chose that instant to strike, betting that murdering the Medici brothers in full public view would collapse the dynasty and hand them the city. When the hired swordsmen lost their nerve, 2 priests took over the job. It half worked. Giuliano de' Medici was stabbed 19 times and died on the cathedral floor. But his elder brother, Lorenzo, the one who truly mattered, twisted away with only a gash to the neck, and detail worth savoring. Minutes earlier, a conspirator had embraced him warmly at the door, partly to feel whether he was wearing armor beneath his clothes. That failure was fatal to the plotters. Florence did not rise for the Pazzi. It rose against them, and dozens were hanged from the windows of the town hall, one of them later sketched from the corpse by a young Leonardo da Vinci. And it gets worse for the conspirators, because the survivor they left behind became Lorenzo the Magnificent, more powerful and more adored than ever, the patron under whom the Renaissance reached full bloom. A conspiracy built to end the Medici made them immortal instead. Number 18. The actor in the president's box. John Wilkes Booth was a celebrity, one of the most admired stage actors in America, and a fanatical believer in the Confederate cause, even after it had plainly lost. On the night of the 14th of April, 1865, 5 days after the South surrendered, he slipped into the presidential box at Ford's Theater and shot Abraham Lincoln in the back of the head with a small brass pistol, the direct descendant of Gerard's weapon from 3 centuries earlier. He leapt to the stage, shouting "Sic semper tyrannis," and it was part of a wider plot. A fellow conspirator was busy stabbing the Secretary of State the same night. Booth thought he was avenging the South. What he actually did was remove the one man with the stature and the will to make the peace a generous one. In Lincoln's place rose Andrew Johnson, openly hostile to black civil rights and eager to welcome the old order back. Reconstruction buckled, then collapsed, and into that vacuum poured the laws and the terror that would pin the American South down for a century. Booth killed to help his people. He may have condemned them, and millions of others, to a far longer and crueler defeat than any the war itself had handed down. A single concealed pistol reached across an ocean of time to undo what 4 years of armies could not. Number 19. How a democracy dies in a night. How does a democracy die in a single night? Ask the Reichstag fire. On the 27th of February 1933, the German Parliament building went up in flames, and police arrested a young, unemployed Dutch bricklayer named Marinus van der Lubbe at the scene, who insisted he had set it alone as a lone act of protest. Historians still argue whether he truly acted by himself, and you would be right to be suspicious, because the man who profited most had been chancellor for less than a month. Adolf Hitler called the fire the opening shot of a communist uprising. The very next day, he pushed President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended free speech, free press, privacy of the mail, and protection from arrest, overnight, and, as it turned out, permanently. It was never lifted. That one emergency decree became the legal foundation of the entire Nazi state, the single sheet of paper that let a government jail its enemies, silence its critics, and dismantle a republic from the inside. Before the Enabling Act finished the job weeks later. Remember the arsonist back at number 12, betting that a fire could echo through the centuries? This is the same wager with the stakes turned monstrous. One man with a flame handed a party the keys to a country, and that country handed the world its darkest decade. Number 20. 3 shots in a garden. 3 shots at close range, in a Delhi garden, on the evening of the 30th of January 1948, from a small Beretta pistol, Gerard's old invention making its final appearance in this list. The gunman was Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who believed Mohandas Gandhi had betrayed Hindus by being too gentle toward Muslims and too willing to accept the partition of India. Godse wanted to break Gandhi's grip on the new nation and clear the road for a harder, narrower idea of India. He accomplished the precise opposite, and completely. Gandhi's last breath was reportedly the name of God, Hey Ram. Nehru told a grieving country by radio that the light has gone out of our lives. Gandhi, already revered, was fixed forever as a martyr and the father of the nation. His message carried further by his death than it might have traveled in another decade of his life. The movement Godse had killed for was banned and disgraced for a generation. He raised a pistol to erase one fragile old man and instead cut him permanently into stone, which is the quiet, terrible thread running through all 20 of these stories. Again and again, The surest way anyone ever found to make a thing eternal was to try, with total conviction, to destroy it. None of this was the work of an army, and that is the whole unsettling point. The First World War. The fall of the Roman Republic, a corporation that ruled a subcontinent, dissolved by one shot, the legal skeleton of the Nazi state, and the most reproduced painting on earth, made priceless by a man in a stolen smock. Trace any of them back far enough, and you arrive at a single person, on a single ordinary day, usually alone, usually acting on a reason far smaller than the wreckage it left. We began on a corner in Sarajevo, with a boy who had already failed and only got his second chance because a driver missed a turn. That is what history actually runs on. Not destiny, not grand design, but one hand, one blade or match or trigger, and a chain of consequences that nobody in the room could possibly see. Next time, we will turn the whole thing over. 20 accidents, blunders, and lucky mistakes that saved more lives than any hero ever set out to save. Until then, here is your assignment, and I want a real answer. Of these 20, pick the single one whose ripple you find hardest to believe came from one person. Name it, and tell me why that one. Not all of them. One. I will be reading in the comments.